Hello, everybody. This is Jen Powers-Alge from the ARC of Ohio, and welcome to the ARC podcast. I'm here without my pal Lindsay today, who usually does the podcast with me. She had her kids have one of their school meetings this morning. But I'm excited today because I have a really great guest. I have my friend and colleague and person I always ask all my SPED law questions to, and also call because her son is 1 year older than my daughter Evie, and she's like a little bit ahead of me in this game. So I have a lot of like Down syndrome type questions for her. Ashley Barlow, thank you for coming on the ARC podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jen. It's always good to chat with you.
Yes, I know we could talk all day. And I get to see you again tomorrow too at our government affairs meeting at
I
the
know,
Government Association. So twice in a week. I feel so special.
the big week.
So yeah, Ashley, tell us about yourself. You are a special education attorney. You're an advocate. You live in Kentucky, but you do a lot of work here in Ohio as well. Please tell us about your business. Your website is phenomenal. I know you have a conference set for tomorrow. I don't even know if that's open still for people, but tell us about that and about the Collaborative IEP business you have.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I'm happy to. So thanks again for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And like you said, I am a special education attorney. I'm licensed in Kentucky. I actually have a license in Ohio, but it is inactive. It's frankly just too much for me to keep up with with the continuing ed. And one of the reasons why I could let Ohio go is because I do have a very collaborative mentality as it applies to special education advocacy. So a lot of attorneys will only file due process lawsuits or file other complaints. And I've got this mentality towards special education advocacy that is extremely collaborative. Which kind of goes into my history a little bit. So I started off as an attorney in a general practice. And, I mean, like I always tell people, I was the landslide lady in my little county in Kentucky for a while, but I did a lot of divorce work. And in divorce work, I was very collaborative. I was very solutions oriented and kind of mediation oriented. And I eventually became a mediator and mediated tons of cases. And so I like this idea of, organizational leadership, advocacy, negotiation, mediation, compromise, and teamwork. And I've always done special education. In 2012-ish, I decided to focus more on special education. It's been my number one focus since. And now I only do special education work. So in 2020, I was realizing that I had a lot of families that were not hiring me for two main reasons. One, they didn't want to have an attorney. They felt like having an attorney would infuse a lot of destructive, negative conflict into their meetings. And no matter how hard I tried to explain that I focus on constructive and ideological conflict, which really helps a team move forward, people still were not hiring me for that reason. And then also the cost. It's expensive to have an attorney or advocate. And it's not as common here in the Midwest to do that. And so I thought, how can I help more families get access to special education advocacy resources with less expense and without, if they're afraid of having an attorney or advocate, while I don't think that that's necessarily a founded concern, how can I do it? So I started this business called the Collaborative IEP, and we've got all kinds of resources. So I have a digital course that helps you kind of learn special ed start to finish. I've got a podcast called called the Collaborative IEP Podcast. I have tons of digital downloads. I've got a whole video catalog called the IEP Guru Academy. And then, as you just mentioned, I do an annual conference where I bring in other advocates, specialists like behaviorists, OTs, speech paths, other attorneys, parents, caregiver resources like therapists and that sort of thing. And we do a conference. And this year it's running from the 26th to the 28th of February. If this airs before that, it's free if you attend. You get 24-hour access each day. But there is an all-access pass that'll be available after the conference. And it's very reasonably priced as well.
It is your website. I mean, those IEP Guru little videos. What are they, like $10 or something? But they're great because what I tell people is when you go to like a meeting and when you have like your concern in an IEP meeting, or even if you need a waiver or any other kind of advocacy you're doing, you really just need like good, solid um, language and things and persuasive things to say. And those little snippet videos that you give are perfect for people because it gives you exactly what you need to say for them to be, ding, okay, this mom knows her stuff. This parent actually, understands what we actually need to do here. And, in accordance with the law and in accordance with like our own this person's individualized plan and program. And so I just think those are great. And I think
Thank
everything on
you.
there, you did exactly what we need, like where the gaps were, because I think you're right about like it's just expensive to have an attorney. And it is like when I go to meetings and I'm licensed here in Ohio and I'm only doing educational advocacy, but they still send their attorneys because I'm an attorney.
Yeah.
And it just sometimes it's fine, but sometimes it does like make it really litigious and it's not something a lot of parents want to do, especially the parents we want to reach. We really want to
Yeah.
reach people who need to be educated on this stuff and the people that um want to just figure out the solution and not just fight, you know.
And that's really it. I mean, that's why those guru videos came up because the idea is I'm a guru and I can teach you to become a guru in the amount of time it takes you to consume a cup of coffee. So my goal was to make them 12 minutes long. I'm pretty loquacious. I talk a lot.
Same.
Um, but Jen, from work that we've done at the Down Syndrome Association together, I am of the opinion that when an issue arises for a caregiver, we want the answer right now. And we will be up until midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, up again at 4 o'clock in the morning, Googling common issues with potty training with a child with Down syndrome or um, behavior that comes from a sensory function. And we want answers now. And so I know from the special education perspective that if somebody's got an inclusion argument or if somebody wants alternate placement or, any kind of specific thing, that they want those answers now and they don't have a ton of time.
Mhm.
And so these are intended to be really efficient videos to get you access to, just like you're saying, resources to move the ball down
Yes.
the road and to actually get something done.
Yeah.
So I always say that my child gave me, I probably was born with this, but he really heightened my BS radar.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
cut to the chase, lady. I need real results. And that's kind of what these videos are intended to do.
I think it's great. And the reason I really wanted to have you here, I want people to find you and find these resources and to hire you to help consult with their school districts, especially right now, because we got a lot of stuff going on
Yes.
in our state and at the federal level. So I've been listening to your podcast, and you do something that I've been looking for on there, and it's actually talking about what's going on, current events right now, and what can we do about it. And so, thank you first of all for doing your podcast and for keeping us informed on the local or on what's going on with our education department because you are kind of my resource at the federal level for that kind of stuff. And it helped put me at ease, but also educated me a lot. I learned a lot from that one podcast. So I need you to talk
Good.
about where people can find that podcast. Again, it's the Collaborative IEP. You can find it on all the Spotify and all those places. But what you talked about was the executive order that said we're going to shut down the Department of Education, basically. And what does that mean for us? An executive order is, it is what it is, but it's, it's scary for us. But can they do that? Can they shut down the Department of Education? A whole department?
So by executive order, no. And that's a really wonderful thing. But there actually is a bill that is in Congress that is intended to do the exact same thing. So what you saw on social media is a real concern. But the quick little byline is this has been attempted before and it did not gain much traction. So we can dive into it a little bit deeper. But the first, like everybody take a deep breath, is this has been attempted before.
Yeah.
We'll model co-regulation.
Mhm.
And it is It did not gain a lot of traction. So what has happened thus far is that Representative Thomas Massie from Kentucky has filed a bill. It's HR 899. It's one sentence long, and the intent is to abolish the Department of Education at the federal level by 12/26/26. So the end of December next year, about 18, 15, 18 or 20 months from now.
Okay.
Um, and the in order for that to be successful, he would need 60 votes in the Senate. He introduced this bill during Trump's first administration, and it didn't gain much traction. Last year, a very similar bill made its way through the House, and every Democrat voted against it, and 60 Republicans voted against it. It does, however, seem to be getting a lot of publicity and a lot of support from Americans, like constituents
Mm.
of Republican members of Congress. And so maybe it will get a little bit more traction right now, but that's to be determined. It's not come anywhere close to committee meeting or vote or anything. And I would imagine that it won't for a second, but definitely something to keep on our radar. So executive order cannot abolish the Department of Education. It does need an act of Congress because the Department of Ed is established by Congress. That's not to say that the administration won't try to change that law. And I think, people are saying, well, they intend to change that law. Again, something to keep on our radar, but nothing to freak out about right now in February of 2025.
Yeah.
So we are seeing that things are changing very rapidly, but actually last week, so like I guess week 4 of the administration, not a ton happened by way of the Department of Ed. And so maybe things are starting to slow down. Um, who knows? And I have, let me just mention this really quickly. It's off topic for that question, but one thing that the Trump administration said the during their election campaign season, as well as early on in their presidency, was that they intend to um, really kind of get right to work, get all these executive orders in and get a bunch of bills filed, and let's get started on this. And if we look back in history at what happened during the first administration, they weren't as impactful with as much legislation and executive order, but they had a similar plan. And the psychology of that was to really overwhelm people
Mhm.
such that people kind of put their heads in the sand,
Mhm.
and then they would start to like chip away at changes because they could slide stuff past us.
Right.
And so my mentality through all of this, Jen, and this kind of goes to you saying like that you have used my podcast as a resource, is we have to choose news media outlets or organizations to help inform us very deliberately
Mhm.
and not get caught in the cycle of overwhelm such that we shut down. Because as a whole, we're going to need to stay open to those legislative updates that we're getting from national organizations and from, whatever news media we choose, right? Because we don't want to miss an NBC alert or an alert from Autism Speaks or the Down Syndrome,
Right.
National Down Syndrome Congress or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very overwhelming. And like, I totally agree. When I do see the alerts now, it focuses me. It gives me exactly what I need. I really respect those organizations that you mentioned. The ARC of the United States does a really nice job too of
Yes.
not doing a million of these, just doing it when it's really important. I think that's true because I mean, right now they're doing their meetings in the middle of the night, their budget, they're working on their budget, and a lot of times they're voting on the House and even the Senate when they're trying to work on their budget priorities. These are happening in the middle of the night, and you're like,
Right.
"When is?" But then when you sit back and look at, okay, wait, this is how the budget goes. So at the state level, the budget's not going to be done until July.
Right.
At the federal level, the budget's usually not done until like late summer, August. I mean, it doesn't have to be done till October. Like, and so, okay, we're okay. And as far as like the budget goes, but it's good to know that as far as like our Department of Education goes, we're okay right now. Why should we care about the Department of Education? Because when I called Bernie Moreno's office, his aide told me he's for shutting it down because it should just be done. All of this should just be done at the state level anyway. And my kids will just be totally fine because my state will take care of it. So why? You're right. So I was like, perfect. Thanks so much for your time. Bye. Why
Well, I think it's
do I
important to
think?
look at what the Department of Education does. And we can also talk about kind of where we think the Trump administration intends to put some of the duties that the Department of Ed does, because I think that's also pertinent here.
Yeah,
But when we think about what the Department of Education does, I've got a nice little list over here. Jen, I outline all of this so that I can speak as objectively as possible. So I will be looking over at my outline and
yes, please.
I don't know what the psychologists say. I remember one time hearing about if you look to the left, it means you're lying, or if you look to the right, it means you're lying or something. So I'm always like, my other screen is over there. That's what I'm looking at. I don't know if it means I'm lying or not, but I'm reading.
I'm always looking down so you guys can see like my head, but I have to
Oh,
read
yeah.
it too. I have to.
Well, I have bifocals, and so I oftentimes apologize to my clients because they're looking at my nose as I'm trying to read my computer screen. Okay, so if we look at what the Department of Education does, my kind of four main bullet points are they obviously administer federal education funding by way of grants, loans, that sort of thing. They enforce the federal education laws, which are important to us, including civil rights laws, because within the Department of Education, there are subdivisions such as OSERS, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, which houses OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs. You can imagine what those two offices do, as well as an Office of Civil Rights that is unique to the Department of Ed, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And the OCR handles things like discrimination on the basis of many different bases, including disability, which impacts the disability population and a lot of other classes of people that might, co-occur with disability, even literally even the Boy Scouts of America. The Department of Ed also does a lot of research and then analyzes the research, which helps to impact the development of our laws. Laws are based on research, as well as, where we're going to put funding dollars. And then obviously best practices and innovation in education. And then, of course, they do support states and even local school districts on things like, training, effective implementation of programming, et cetera. So if those things, were to go away, we would have a significant impact. If we looked at special ed specifically, we're looking at enforcement of IDEA, 504, the civil rights laws, all of the guidance from OSERS and OSEP that, really helps us to interpret laws based on real life scenarios. We look at funding for special education programs like, grants for Head Start and grants for early childhood and for assistive technology and that kind of stuff. The technical assistance that they get is immense, and we're already seeing that could be changing. And then also monitoring. There's a lot of reporting, especially since 2004 when IDEA was reauthorized. There's a lot of emphasis on data collection by states and local school districts, and that gets monitored, and then the monitoring impacts programming and funding for the future. So all of that could be in jeopardy.
I mean, to me, it'd be one thing if you live in a state where public education is, we're really investing in it and we feel, like it's something that the people in our state, really want. But for somewhere like Ohio and Kentucky and Indiana, and our surrounding, and as you get lower, in southern states, we don't. And so for me, when I talked to Bernie Moreno's aide, I was like, well, we're cutting funding and we're shifting our focus from public education to charter schools and private schools here in Ohio, and my kids can't go to those schools. So I asked him, before you vote, on shutting down the Department of Ed, please talk to a family like mine who has a child on an IEP, just to make sure that you're talking to the right constituents and you're not just talking to rich constituents who sending their kids to private schools who don't really care about our public school system because
Right.
my kids can't go. No matter how much money I have, my kids will not be accepted in a private school. So,
Well, and so that kind of goes to what the plan would be,
yeah.
right? So if we eliminate the Department of Ed, then these laws would still exist. So who would enforce the laws and who would undertake the tasks? That's the question here. And that's kind of what you're implying with that comment. So the Trump administration has not said anything officially since they took office on what their plans are for like where things would go. In fact, a group of senators wrote a letter. I don't know if it was or members of Congress, congressmen as well as senators. It could have even been every Democrat. It was 7 pages of signatures, but I didn't check it against the roster. They wrote a letter to the now acting Secretary of the Department of Education. Linda McMahon will be confirmed soon,
Mhm.
but the acting secretary. And they said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about what this looks like, either elimination or reduction of the supports offered by the Department of Ed. And then the next day they showed up at the Department of Ed and they were not granted access to the building, which is something that is different. And so that was of great concern to these members of Congress because they were like, we're used to being able to have conversations. We're used to being able to get into government buildings and that sort of thing. So I think it remains a big question as to what their actual plans are.
Yeah.
But what we do know is we do know some ideas that they had for plans. There's that big kind of policy document that isn't necessarily signed and it fully endorsed by the Trump administration, but it's called Project 2025. And President Trump has referenced Project 2025 and has drawn ideas from Project 2025 pretty consistently throughout the campaign and in the early stages of his presidency. So what Project 2025 suggests relative to the Department of Ed is that you take idea in the Department of Education and you move it over to a different governmental agency, administrative body called Health and Human Services. That is, in fact, the office that is being run by Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has said some things that are not founded in research relative to the cause and implications of developmental disabilities like autism. And, he has indicated that he might make SSRIs unavailable to Americans and things like that. So obviously somebody that has said some things that have been pretty detrimental to the IDD community. Then we also, and so then to take that to that's a long explanation to get to this block grant issue.
Right.
But if that were to happen, what would happen is the money that the Department of Ed currently has would go to either states or to individual schools by way of no strings attached block grants.
Mhm.
Never did I think that I was going to read Project 2025, but I was like, what in the heck is that?
Yeah.
So I had to read it. In pertinent part, I did not read it all, but I did a control find and I found no strings attached block grants. And I was like, okay, let's read up a little bit.
Mhm.
I went up a couple pages and I read through it. So basically what that would do is it would give money to local schools and allow families to take their education dollars to private schools and special education that's significant. So we now have federal funding that could go, and it's not a law yet, but it could go to private schools.
Mhm.
And they wouldn't, it seems unlikely that they would have to follow federal laws relative to special education.
Right.
As it currently stands, in Ohio, for example, you waive your idea rights if you take that money and take it to a private school. So, of course, this could lead to inequitable distribution of funds, underfunding for schools where they already have low funding, as you alluded to, Jen. And then, of course, weaker enforcement of IDEA and the civil rights laws and other
Yeah.
laws, as well as a ton of other
Yeah.
impacts.
And another thing, and I'm just saying this, and it's kind of a little snippet of what I'm dealing with in education. But if you have a right to go to school until you're 22, if you have a developmental disability and have an IEP, But if you take one of those autism scholarships and you take it to a private school where you're homeschooling and using like a private program, a lot of people are being told in schools right now, they changed the code on this, that at 18, you can no longer use that autism scholarship. And you just go ahead and you can go back to your school, public school, or if you have enough credit hours, if you've already gained your graduation credits, you just have to graduate and be done with school. And I have
Yeah.
a few families in that situation where I'm like, this is another reason why it's so important that we protect the Department of Education, because where do you go now if we don't have the Department of Education and we don't have anywhere to file a more of like a federal complaint? You know, you can make your state complaint, but the state, this is from the state of Ohio saying we're not going to pay for this anymore after 18. So for those families, I am concerned because their kids do have a right to keep going to schools, and their IEP should be really clear about what they need. And to be honest, their public school system can't manage what they're needing, which is why they chose to go outside of their public school. So
Well,
this is
not to mention the transition services, right?
yes,
Because then you're
exactly.
at transition age and you need, more curated transition services, and you're in a district that hasn't educated you for several years. So I do think that's important. I've not seen a change to the code in Ohio. I'm no longer licensed in Ohio, but I did have a couple of cases in Ohio when I was practicing where students, I think every student that was impacted by this had autism, in my case, I mean,
Yeah.
and they had met their graduation requirements. And at that time, there was a law in the books. I don't know if it still is. And even if it was, I wouldn't say because I'm not licensed in Ohio. But there was a law, like a case that indicated that if you had met your graduation requirements, that they did not have to provide you services anymore. And so it put districts in kind of between a rock and a hard place
Mhm.
because they knew they needed to, they had met their academic obligation, but they knew that the child needed more transition services and
Yeah.
maybe adaptive skills and that kind of stuff. But the district's like, every dollar counts, and we simply can't do this.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that puts people in a pickle. I think the other thing about this kind of like charter school idea is, frankly, I think in my experience, it works pretty well in Ohio. I think there are, like Jen and I live in the greater Cincinnati area. I think there are some really wonderful private schools in the greater Cincinnati area. They are mostly the ones that serve the autism population are a lot of them are on a wait list and they're very full and it's really hard to get in. But for the most part, they do an excellent job. And there are schools that, kind of cater to students whose disability impacts them in specific ways. And there's kind of a wide array of different schools that reach a wide array of different humans. And I think that that is really great. However, we could certainly use looking across the country. What's going to happen if we have, in my opinion, what could happen, right? Like I can't guarantee anything, but my concern is that public districts are going to become either private or they are going to start taking tuition students, and they are going to focus on very certain subsets of students. So we're going to have, maybe let's just choose a couple of like small little communities. Well, we don't even have to name them, right? Like District A is going to say, we are going to become the school for creative and performing arts. And we are going to take tuition for this, and it's going to be $18,000 a year, and it's going to be amazing. And then somebody else says, well, we're going to do architecture and engineering and like this like STEM planning kind of thing. And then we're going to get a school that does a really good job at other STEM areas. And then we're going to get, like a bunch of trade schools. And then we're going to have these little neighborhood schools that still exist, right? And so the kids that are going to be stuck in the little neighborhood schools are going to be the kids whose parents don't know about all the other resources and aren't going out to the other schools to get the information. And then the students who aren't accepted at the other schools, like you said, Jen, who by and large are going to include a large majority of the students that at least have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Because my child that has Down syndrome is not going to get admitted into the STEM school or maybe the theater program, but not to a lot of those different schools. So now our public schools don't have good peer models in this hypothetical, right? They won't have good peer models and they won't have the kind of wide breadth of humanity that exists in the real world. An idea like if we go back, this is why I think this is so important. If we go back to the purpose of IDEA, one of the main purposes of the law is to further a child's opportunities for education, employment, and independent living. If our schools don't look like the real world, we are not fulfilling the purpose of the federal law. I think that's a huge problem.
Yeah, I think it is too. And that's kind of my problem with I love a good choice for families like our Heights Center and our Linden Groves and CCAs and places for our kids to go here in Southwest Ohio who have autism and their public schools are just failing them. But I will say it's not like the kids that go through those programs are going to have a tough time oftentimes living on their own, working, and being independent in their community. Now they're probably working on some really great skills, especially at height, and as they're in high school in those years, and especially if they can stay till they're 22 on that autism scholarship, they can work on those independent living skills. But you're not getting the same experience as you would in public school with all the peers around you. You're not seeing what the opportunities that are out there for everyone. You have a pretty limited experience. And it's when they all go on their transition skill job training things, it's like I literally hear every single kid in Hamilton County does vet tech training. And I'm like, sorry, but we're not going to have like 200 vet techs, like graduating each year. So I'm going to need you guys to go to
Right.
different schools and find different things and stay in your community. If you're leaving your district, but your family's still living there and you're going a half an hour away to somewhere else, you're not really going to find the job that you're going to be able to do in your community. So I
Yeah.
totally agree with what the purpose of IDEA was. And I'm always I have no judgment for families who take that autism scholarship. I think it's important that we have it. I think it's important that we have choice. I don't want exactly what you're saying is all of us to have this basically uninvested place where just the most vulnerable kids in our community have to keep going, because they have no other choice. And we're using our tax money and paying higher rates for our kids to go to private school who could have paid for private school on their own. Like my
Right.
parents paid for
That's
me to go
that's
to
the big
Catholic
purpose.
school.
That's the big argument. That's where, like, because I'll get in my head, I'll start a walk and be like, hang on a second, like this does work in Ohio. Why am I against this? And by the end of my walk, I'll come back and think, yes, because if my child wants to go to a STEM oriented school and I care enough about that, then I'm going to find the resources to do that. And I can pay for private school, just like people have done in America since the beginning of time. And private schools nowadays do a much more uh,
Oh, Ashley, you're breaking up a little bit.
opportunity because if they need to go to specialized schools, they need to have those specialized schools accessible to them. We do have this continuum of placements that goes down to special class and special school and even to home placement and institutionalization. All of those things are very expensive. But
Mhm.
if we start to open this up to general education students, those students are going to flock out of public schools in droves, and our public schools are going to be left these kind of like barren wastelands
Yeah.
of communities that don't resemble the real world. It also, is going to lead to a lot less accountability. And we think about less accountability, we start to get teacher shortages. We start to get uneven distribution of funding.
You start to get
We,
ECOT scandals.
yeah. I mean, yes, history will repeat itself.
I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just this is what bothers me about it too. I mean, when we talk about a public good, something is so important as education, handing it over to like middlemen, like we do with healthcare and handing it over to insurance. When you're handing it over to charter school place businesses that are trying to make money, you're corrupting it and totally taking the accountability of actually teaching kids what they need to learn in order to become not just educated, but good citizens
Yeah.
in our communities. And it's gonna be and we also have like the technology there. So we learned during COVID that it doesn't work for our kids to learn on a computer all day. But I'm seeing a whole heck of a lot of kids doing that because they're not able to stay in their public school because their public
Yeah.
school's been defended so bad and they don't have the teachers that they need. And so they're doing this stuff on a computer. And we're going to be seeing a lot more of that. We're going to be seeing a lot more of these schools popping up saying, look, we've got this Khan Academy kind of thing. Great. I think it's great to use it in schools, but I don't think that our kids should be on this thing all day learning that way. We showed that it didn't work. And
That's
I
the
think,
only option that I have in Kentucky.
yeah,
There are no schools that are similar to the schools that we have here in Southwest Ohio, the Height Academy and CCA and those schools. And so when I'm down in central Kentucky in rural areas of Kentucky, I don't have any options. So I have a few students that are on a Khan Academy or Edgenuity type online program so that they have access to their general education curriculum, but so that they can be educated and get their specially designed instruction at home via, either a tutor that comes to their house or video conferencing with school or going to the board office to access a tutor or a teacher by home instruction. Um, because at school, they were exhibiting such dangerous behaviors that they were traumatic for the students. And so we sometimes we have to get students out of schools, but they live in regions where they can't access other things and they don't necessarily need residential placement. And so, yes, in Ohio, maybe something would look different, but depending on where you live, it could look extremely,
well,
extremely different.
and
And
we
then,
have the
and
same
then
thing
the
with the
flips,
rural problem, like just like you have in Kentucky,
right?
all of our rural districts do not have an
Sure.
option. There's no option.
But then if you live in Utah, you've got a whole state worth of choices. If you live on the East Coast, you've got, like in New England and the Northeast, you've got all kinds of choices. And there are all kinds of choices in Florida for either day programming or residential programs. I know this is a statewide too. There's a few in Cleveland that are also really good, like Monarch and those places. So the inequity of the choices in the schools in existence currently would make school choice very, very um, um, privilege
I was
oriented.
going to say inequitable because it is totally a school choice is a choice for privileged people because
Yeah.
honestly, and again, what did we learn during COVID? You don't have public school, mom can't work or dad can't work. What do we want in the state of Ohio? For people to not to work? You want us to
Mhm.
leave our jobs and have our kids homeschooled at home and we're not working and contributing to our economy? Like
Right.
completely counterintuitive to what we're supposed to be doing. And especially when we're making everybody go back to work, like and stop doing the work from
In
home.
their office. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's hard enough to work when they are in school.
100%. All right, I'm going to shift gears really quick and then we're going to wrap up. Just want to talk about Medicaid really quick because we're scared. We're seeing some Medicaid cuts at the federal and the state level. And I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on how scared we should be and what we can do advocacy wise um, to make sure that we don't feel those cuts or that they don't cut. I don't know if it's something that we can just say, I think it's happening. What do you think, Ashley? How can we advocate?
So Medicaid is not my most number one like known area, first of all. But I was on a call not too long ago with a like within the last week with a national advocacy group. And what I learned is that so like the way that the budget is set has to do with fiscal year, right? And Jen, you just said more about like when the budget's due and all of that kind of stuff. So there is some deadline in March, and as it applies for March, everything is funded through March.
Yeah.
So the big push for cuts to Medicaid is going to happen this summer.
Yeah.
And we should start to see more of how those cuts might look in the summer. What it looks like is there are some significant tax cuts coming down the pike, and
Mhm.
those tax cuts are going to be paid for with cuts to Medicaid. I don't think anybody knows what those are going to look like yet, but I think that there is a significant risk that there are going to be cuts to Medicaid. How states then interpret that and what states do with their traditional Medicaid and their, waiver-based Medicaid systems and that sort of thing will be up to the states. So definitely something to keep an eye on. What can we do? So I think I think there are two really important things that we can do. The first thing is, as it applies to school and school advocacy, now is the most important time ever to start to take that destructive adversarial conflict out of your IEP teams and out of your communities and to start working on provoking empathy in your IEP teams and any other place where your child is going to be. Because I want to hear you, I want you to hear this really loudly and clearly. And this also works for like places of employment for adults. If you are an adult self advocate or a caregiver for an adult, and whether it's like accessing the YMCA for community involvement. And if we start to lose protections for people with disabilities in the workplace, in the community, at school, in our religious institutions, any place else, we want for people to continue to provide supports because they want to, even if the laws don't say that they have to or that they don't have to the same extent that they do in the beginning of 2025. So we have to start to provoke empathy. We have to start working on relationships. I don't think there's any other way around it. So something that you can do at the very heart and soul of everything is to really just get out there and start telling your story. Then as it applies to changes to Medicaid, I also think it's really important, Jen, to go out and to just start talking to your legislators. There's this awesome app that a bunch of us have downloaded. It's called 5Calls. It literally, you click on it, it tells you whom to call, like who your legislators are, gives you their phone numbers, gives you their email addresses, and it gives you a script. Jen talked to somebody in an office. Most of the time, it's not intimidating. You literally get either a staffer who's a college kid in a brand new Brooks Brothers suit, but they only have two, so don't get too intimidated.
Exactly right.
They spent their entire income on it.
Uh-huh.
Um, or you get the voicemail and you literally just read a script onto the voicemail. Hi, I'm Ashley Barlow. I'm a constituent of Representative whoever's. I live at this address and I'm calling because blah, blah, blah. Half the time you don't even get through the entire script. But everybody has 5 calls, so they're just going to literally what happens. And this is why this is important. This is called grassroots advocacy. Jen, when anybody in my family complains to somebody else, and then like person B is like, yeah, I agree. My mom will say, don't pile on. Like, you don't have to take up your brother's argument or your dad's argument or whatever. Grassroots advocacy is about piling on and it works with legislative policy. So when we call, they literally, it used to be this thing called like a green slip or a green paper or something. Now it's electronic, but they literally put a tally mark in Medicaid for disabled people. Don't move the Department of Ed. They literally put a tally mark. And then at the end of the day or the week or the month, the staff kind of calculates, here's what your constituents care about. And then of course, that's probably where the efforts of that office are going to go. So if we start saying Medicaid, 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 we are going to get an impact, right? So you can tell your story, you can start to develop those relationships and just start getting the ball rolling.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, totally agree. Just tell your story, get out there. I call it's like the one thing you can do that really, I feel great. I don't feel intimidated for exactly the reason you said. The guy is 20 years old. He's a babes, maybe 22. They're more intimidated from taking the call than they are than you should be. Another one little thing I wanted to add is just the Medicaid expansion part here in Ohio. If they do cut Medicaid, Mike DeWine, our governor's already said that he's going to go ahead and stop the Medicaid expansion. Almost 1 million people in Ohio are on Medicaid expansion. And how that affects our population is because a lot of our direct support professionals, people that work with our kids, people that come into our homes, people that work at institutional settings, um, they are people, I mean, people that are helping you in all ways in the service industry. A lot of people are on that Medicaid expansion. It's been really critical and great for our state, and it will be gone if they do cut Medicaid at the federal level. Mike DeWine's already said that. So um, it's there's a lot, and at the state level, we're going to be talking a lot more about what's going on at the state budget. So stay tuned. But um, there's things you can do at your state level too. I'm really grateful to Ashley for being here today to talk about education and federal politics because this is not my area either, or my area of expertise. And I'm really grateful for you for breaking that all down. If you want to learn more, listen to her podcast, the Collaborative IEP. She has a really great episode that goes into this more in depth. And actually, I just learned so much today and from that. And she also just has really great guests on there. She gets some really cool people from all across the country that can talk about autism and reading. She does a lot of work on reading, which is near and dear to my heart and my EVMA's heart too, as we try to just continue the reading and the fluency.
Keep it up. Lifelong learning.
Lifelong, exactly. But thank you, Ashley. Can you give them, it's the collaborativeiep.com, right?
Yes, and on social media, it's at the Collaborative IEP.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, friend.